Welcome to my budget deck channel where I try to make decks as cheap and playable as possible. So if this is something you'd be interested in, then why not subscribe? Today, with the new edition of the solo gates, the solo missions, we have got actually new cards, which is new Rikka cards. Rikka Konkon, I don't know if I pronounced this right, and I don't really care. Rikka Princess as well, very, very important, very, very good cards, and they elevate the deck to new levels. I will actually make an updated version of the Sun Avalon Rikka build with this, because this is very, very important for it. But first I wanted to make a pure Rikka control kind of deck, because in case you don't really like the link spammy version of this deck, or you prefer control decks in general, or you just want to play a pure Rikka version, some people find the art very aesthetic and then want to focus around that kind of playstyle rather than mixing in some other weird tree kind of things, then this is the deck profile that you've been looking for. We will talk about what makes this deck quite good. We will talk about some cards that you could splash in if you want to move away a bit from the budget version and extend a tiny bit. And I will explain my card choices and why I run them at certain ratios. Rikka Petal, I don't think I have to do much explaining why I run this card at 3, because this card is a very good play starter. It comes back in your opponent's end phase, so this keeps getting you repetitive searches throughout the game, so this is very good. It is a massive play starter and does so much for the deck. So definite 3 off, technically 4 off, because we do run 1-for-1, which can sometimes be bricky considering you don't run that many monsters. So if you play a deck with more hand traps, this becomes less of an issue because you could always discard a hand trap if you want to. But yeah, sometimes you don't really want to, because they sometimes do more. If this card then gets ashed, then you lose a hand trap and you don't really have a play starter, but it is what it is. 1 Lonefire Blossom, you usually want to run 2 to 3. 3 can be a bit iffy because in the end you do have other normal summons with Rikka Petal, for example. But Lonefire Blossom can basically get you any monster that you need out of your deck. So this card is quite nice, but if it gets ashed, obviously same problem. Technically a bit worse, because if this card gets ashed, you still have it on board. If this card gets ashed, you don't. So there's this going on. We do run 1 Lonefire Blossom and 2 Mudan. You technically can run 3 if you want to, and I did run 3 in the start and no Lonefire Blossoms, but I think it's better to have 1 card that's normal summonable, because some of the Rikkas need to tribute a monster on board, and that can be quite problematic then if you don't run enough normal summonable monsters. You're stuck with high level monsters and just opening hand. So I decided to go for the ratio of technically triple Mudan, but also Lonefire Blossom could go into Petal and Petal then to Mudan. That's also a thing that could happen. But the effect of Mudan also triggers by being special summoned by Lonefire Blossom, because it just has to be special summoned by the effect of a plant monster, not a Rikka monster, so that is still fine. 1 Ash Blossom, because you basically get 1 for free, and Ash Blossom is just a very, very, very strong card. 1 Rose Girl, a card that you usually wouldn't see as much. It can be helpful. There are some synchro monsters that you can actually play. They're not abysmal, but they're also not very good. I just mainly run this card because sometimes you want to have more monsters on board, because this isn't a link spam variant, but you still need some board presence, and this card can actually put up some presence, and it recurs itself, so you will always have a normal summonable monster in hand. You could special summon this card at the start and then tribute it off for certain effects, because yes, you can tribute your opponent's monsters, but only once per turn, so this is a bit problematic from time to time. We have a double Primula. You could cut it down to 1, you could play it at 3. I feel 2 is quite nice. You can search it with Princess. There's a combo that you can do with Rikka Glamour, and then you can go into the Link monster, the Xyz monster, and so on and so on. This card is... it's not amazing, but it's also not bad. And the one thing to keep in mind, if you tribute a monster off of Rikka Glamour and then search this card still triggers, because the monster still has been tributed, in that kind of timing wise. So that is actually quite neat and can help you from time to time. Other than that, the increase the level can be helpful, because we do play 2 of the rank 6 that most people wouldn't be playing, but since we had to fill up our extra deck with some stuff, we do play it, so this can come up, but usually won't. Also, it's quite nice because you can technically go into level 7 synchros with this if you want to be playing some better synchros. That could help as well. Rikka Princess, one of the most amazing cards that have been added with the field spell. This card does basically everything. It can special summon itself, which is quite nice. Locks you into plant monsters, which is okay. don't really matter. It doesn't really matter, especially only if this card is on the board. Like, it's not even for the rest of the turn or anything. It's just while this card is on board, so it's not that bad. Sadly, the negate is a win effect, but if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I've even done it in testing. You can stop your opponent's monster negates, hand traps. So this card is actually quite nice, even if you have to tribute a monster, but it's still better to get certain stuff off. The only problem is, technically it would work with Rikka Petal, but the problem is then you have to tribute Petal, and then whatever you search from your hand you can't summon, because you won't have one of your Rikkas still on board or plant monster on board, and then you have this kind of problem. This is where stuff like Rose Girl kicks in. Could summon Rose Girl then because the card is sent to the graveyard, so that's quite nice. But yeah, technically this can stop hand traps, but it doesn't as well, so that's that. And also this is obviously a negate during your opponent's turn, but watch out with the win effect. Not that really matters a lot of the time, but keep that in mind. Missing timing and stuff is a thing. Mudan, the Rikka Fairy, already said it. This card searches you all of your Rikka spell traps. Very, very crazy. You can get the field spell, which you mainly want to be getting because the field spell then gets any of the other ones, so would be kind of pointless to not get the field spell unless you already have it. Then this just extends your plays basically. One, Erika, the Rikka Fairy, not a must inclusion, but I quite like the card. It does help you also going into the Rikka Queen in combination with Snowdrop. It does some stuff during the battle phase because your monster gains 1000 attack points, and that helps you get rid of like Chaos Max Dragon or some crazy stuff, which can be quite problematic from time to time. So it's quite nice that you actually run one of this. Technically it works with like Rikka Queen. Rikka Queen then has to tribute a monster before to get up to 4000 because you need the 200 point attack point gain, so that works. This card's quite nice. Also, since we do play double of this, and in the grind game you might run out of good extra deck monsters, especially in a budget build, this card can always get itself back. If a plant monster you control is tributed while the card's in the graveyard, technically you have to banish it afterwards, but if you go into an Xyz and detach this one, or just if the Xyz goes to the graveyard, then this card goes to the graveyard again, and you can do the same thing. So I felt like this card was quite nice. A card that you don't have to run, which I already talked about, you can put one Mudan in if you want. You can play basically anything, one Lonefire Blossom for this card, but I do quite like it. There's certain scenarios where this card can come up. It can get a Mudan back from the graveyard in combination with like Snowdrop Rikka, for example. We do run one Lonefire Blossom, so technically that could work as well at certain times. So I do like running it at one in the deck, but you don't have to. It works just quite well with the Rikka Queen as well. Not that this is our boss monster, even though it might seem like it because I mention it a lot, but just say it a lot because lots of decks do not run this card at all. But it's not as bad as it seems. There's just like, if you don't run a budget version, better cards that you prefer running rather than this. But since in this version we try to focus on the pure playstyle, this card does stuff at least. It's not amazing, but it does stuff. Double Snowdrop, you could cut it down to one if you feel like you've got too many high level monsters and you want to play some other stuff. Same with this, could run one Lonefire Blossom if you want to, some other shenanigans, but this card can be quite nice, and especially helping you go into your Teardrop with the Rikka Queen. The problem with it is sometimes you don't run enough monsters in your deck, that sometimes you might be out of monsters in your hand. It is what it is, but you can always search it together with this one. That's why you run it, because Rikka Glamour has the effect, if you tribute a plant monster you can search too. The problem is obviously, again, they need another plant monster on board with to actually tribute this and actually get it off. Thing is, during your opponent's turn, if you have the field spell up, you can actually tribute one opponent's monster for this card's effect, which is fine. It's fine, can actually help you, and then you still have a plant monster on board usually, and then you can go into your rank 8 and so on and so on and so on. So this works. This can protect you from targeting, removal stuff. It's not terrible, it does things. Yeah, I would run it at 1, but you don't have to if you don't want to. Monster Reborn can be quite helpful, especially if certain stuff gets negated, or you'd have to tribute off stuff and then you don't have anything on board anymore. If you had to negate a hand trap, for example, and then you have Monster Reborn, then you can at least get Plant Monster back, which you contribute again then to actually keep your combos going. So this is why I include one Monster Reborn, but obviously hand traps are also strong. You could run Terraforming to get into the field spell, it's not bad, and so on and so on. There's lots of stuff you can substitute. One for one of the ultra rares you have to craft, but this card is also important for the Sun Avalon variant, so you actually don't lose out too much, and 1 for 1 is also good for lots of other decks. Morphtonic, I think, if you want to. I've got a deck profile of that, but don't watch this, it's terrible. Rikka Glamour, very, very good, can search you up to 2 cards technically, and technically with in combination with the field spell tribute one of your opponent's monsters if you go second. You can see the deck is also not terrible going second, which is quite nice. Would be a bit better if you had obviously a better hand trap lineup, but that's up to you. These kind of cards are all like cards that you can substitute for good hand traps. 1 Paw of Prosperity, because sometimes you do not get your starter, and this card makes sure you have the combo pieces in your hand that you want to, and since you don't draw anyway, and since this is not meant to be an OTK deck, it really doesn't harm you that much, or the extra deck's kind of shit as well, half of it, so it doesn't really matter banishing anything. So I would say include 1, but if you don't have it or don't want to invest in it, then it's fine also. But this card is obviously very generic, so you can run it in like lots of different variants, and on my channel there are lots of videos that do use one of this card, because it's just very, very nice addition to consistency for most decks. Triple field spell, because you get this card for free, and this card does so much for the deck. It's basically Layer of Darkness, but in good. It actually searches your field one of your spell traps, not just the traps, also the spells, which is very nice. And you can, once per turn, if you attribute a plant monster you control to activate a Rikka card. It doesn't work with Pollinosis, so keep that in mind. It's not quite like the other field thing, Layer of Darkness, but it is a bit like it. If you activate a Rikka card effect, you can tribute any face-up monster your opponent controls, even though you do not control it, which is quite a fun addition. That's the last sentence. Also works for stuff like the summon thing, where you have to tribute 1 plant monster. For those ones, that also works. This is what makes this deck quite good going second as well, so you could consider running 1 Terraforming if you have it. A card that basically nobody is running, and I understand why, because this card doesn't really do much anymore since you have the field spell, and you already can tribute off stuff, and you'd rather do other things. But this deck can be quite, well, it can be quite grindy, and sometimes you already drew into like Tranquility or Sheet, or Sheet doesn't really do much, or Tranquility, you don't really have the setup for it, and then it can be helpful to search Flurries if you want to with a field spell. You can't easily cut this card for like any good card, but I just wanted to mention it. The effect isn't terrible. Like if Rikka monster is tributed, and doesn't have to be for a Rikka card effect, it can be with Pollinosis. Ooh, then at least you get rid of some stuff on your opponent's field, and sometimes this is your only removal for cards that otherwise can't be get rid of. If you, for example, play against Antignister and stuff, this, or Chaos Max Dragon comes to mind for certain things. This is your only way that doesn't destroy, it doesn't target, and if your opponent has like one massive boss monster, this actually helps you against it. Depending how the meta is, sometimes you would want this, sometimes you wouldn't. So keep that one in mind. It's not as terrible as it seems, but it's also not amazing. Forbidden Chalice, very good card going second, very good card going first for budget players, like a hand trap, but not actually. Just helps you deal with 1 monster negate the opponent puts on board. This deck in general is very good against monster stuff, but it lacks certain potential against spell trap based decks. You could be running Cosmic Cyclone, probably should put it too. But you know, budget deck, you could run 2 Mystical Space Typhoon. What you would want to cut out with this is probably 1 or 2 Lost Winds. You're not heavily relying on it, and Mystical Space Typhoon can do a bit more sometimes, but it can also be a completely dead card. So yeah, it's always the give and take. What do you think you play against on the ladder the most, and then you have to adjust your deck according to this. Called by the Grave, obviously honorable mention, because hand traps are annoying, and sometimes you need to stop them because your plays otherwise end very, very quickly. So yes, if you have it, run it. It's the kind of tax that you have to pay in modern Yu-Gi-Oh these days. 1 Infinite Impermanence, very good card. In general, you can set it, you can use it to stop your opponent if you go second, so that's quite good. Tranquility, getting your stuff back. You can also tribute an opponent's monster with it nowadays with the field spell, so this card became even better. We'll definitely run it at 1 at least, because it keeps you in the game and keeps your opponent down. Rikka Sheet, very, very strong card as well. I do run it at 2 because you don't mind drawing into it, and since we don't run the double Strenna, it's not that easy to recover it, so yeah, I quite like it at 2. If you feel like 1 is enough, then play it at 1. Keep in mind though that this effect to negate doesn't really stop anything from that already activated. You already would have to use it before it activates its effect, because it just makes it so your opponent's monster cannot activate the effect. It doesn't negate the effect, so that's, you know, keep that in mind. It's not as good, but now with the field spell obviously it's quite good because you can tribute stuff as well. Pollinosis is just in here mainly because of the fact that you don't have much protection to back row like Lightning Storm and these kind of things, Harpy's Feather Duster. This card would give you an option for this. So yeah, I would run it, but if you have better cards, you could also run those. For the extra deck, Queen of Thorns, not very important, but sometimes can be quite nice because your opponent is already kind of low and you don't know how to finish it, but you still have Rose Girl lying around somewhere and like make another card. You will have noticed you don't really run other level 3s, but Lonefire Blossom, but you can make, with Snowdrop, you can make other cards level 3 as well, which is quite fun. So it is possible to go into this. It can come up. It didn't for me yet, but it technically can. Same for those two. This card is actually not terrible, but it's also not great. Like, just in here because you have Rose Girl and the extra deck isn't that jam-packed in this variant. For some reason the ship is is a plant monster. It's not good, but just included. Strenna, very nice card these days, a very good combo with then making it together with Princess and Primula, sending Princess to the graveyard, getting one of your cards back, and then you tribute Strenna off of the negate of Princess, and with Strenna's effect, then you can go into Hyperyton and have another monster negate during your opponent's turn, and can refresh the negate depending on what your opponent is playing. So this is quite a neat combo as well. We do run double the Rikka Queen, not really necessary, but it's a nice to have in the extra deck. So you can always banish some of them off of Pot of Prosperity, but it will come up from time to time, so it's not awful. Teardrop, you could run it too as well if you want to, because you don't have any other rank 8s. Technically you want to be playing stuff like the Sylvan High Protector for your turn, so you actually have some recovering play. So this would be a card that you probably should be including at one point, but it is possible to play the deck without it, but it's a lot harder to finish games if you don't have these kind of effects, because you do only have one rank 8. What it could be playing is this one. It's awful, but it's over 3,000 attack points, and it does have some effects, so it can actually get even more than 3,000 attack points, so that's quite nice. And you can technically stop your opponent's spell traps a little bit, which is a bit annoying because they can just chain it to that one, so it doesn't really do all that much. Yeah, for the fact that you need 3 monsters, this card is absolutely awful. And then you run stuff like Sun Dryas, not really for any combo, just because sometimes you want to get Petal into the graveyard and just rather end on this one, or you just need certain cards in the graveyard, certain low level ones, so this is like a one-off. And then you run one of these and one of this, just not because you can actually go into them, you can only go into them with the effect of Dryas, but like I said, the extra doesn't really matter at this stage, so you'll just banish them off Pot of Prosperity. But sometimes that can come up if you have to finish on Dryas because your opponent disrupts your Petal and you can't do anything else. Then I'd rather have Dryas on board than Petal, just my personal preference, but you obviously can decide whatever you want to be doing. Transverser, Decode Talker, and Liger, budget lineup. If you have to link climb, if you get stuff back with Tranquility, your opponent can't do anything, and then you want to push for game with this, can also be helpful. Obviously, Jasmine, Mangle Answer can be very nice cards to mention. If you want to be playing, going full onto the whole control setup, Rivalry of the Warlords is very nice. Could substitute for Lost Wind, and since you only run plant monsters, basically, this card is very, very, very strong. That's it for the deck profile. Hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like, comment, subscribe, but most importantly, I hope you have a nice day.